you. Specifically, Apple. We have spent the better part of this year talking about the China impact as we saw coronavirus affect that country on Apple, where that country is concerned. But now that you have retail stores there opening back up, but retail stores in the rest of the world for Apple closing, what does that impact look like?
Sure, Morgan. Thanks for having me. And it's a very good question. I would say a month ago, when this whole thing started and Apple pre-announcing on President's Day, it was largely China, tied to China, and more importantly on the supply chain. And what you have seen over the last 1 month is the supply chain in China is actually coming up to speed, with our fieldwork suggesting that, the utilization rates are about 50% compared to 25% a month ago. And they're trending towards getting to 90 to 100% by end of the month, which is a positive. So now the focus shifts to demand. And like you rightly pointed out, the concern with the supply chain last month was demand in China. And now it's slowly expanding to demand in the Western world. And we think there will definitely be impact on that. It's very hard to quantify it today where we are sitting. But when we did an analysis, we tried different scenarios looking at current consensus numbers all the way to down 3% year for Apple, assuming, the global demand gets impacted, especially on the hardware side because of the virus.
Yeah, to that point, Krish, and it's something that I keep coming back to, but is there any way to get your arms around what that demand picture could look like for things like our iPhones and other luxury electronics that Apple is so well known for? I ask that because if people are losing their jobs or they're foregoing paychecks, maybe they're not feeling so confident, we see the economy go into recession, are they going to be as willing to spend that money or move into another upgrade cycle?
Very valid point, And it is a tough one to answer, but one thing I would say is that the way we looked at it was, prior to this whole virus situation, I think the iPhone unit numbers were tracking north of 200 million for calendar 20. And now we are assuming a worst-case scenario if it goes down to around 180, 185 million units, which would probably trigger right around a replacement demand level. Because if you look at the install base of iPhones, just around 1 billion units, maybe a shy of 1 billion units, and in a 5-year replacement cycle, it implies 200 million units per year. So at 185 million units, you're just below what I would characterize as the replacement unit level. So anything else beyond that would suggest to you, people prolonging. So in other words, if Apple ends up shipping close to 185 million units, it's down from what it was pre-virus, but it does assume there is a certain amount of replacement demand happening. Anything below that, I would say, below 180, 185 million units, it implies people are holding out and not willing to switch phones at this time.
Krish, along those lines, how are you modeling Europe? Because I'm thinking not just about Apple. I'm thinking, for example, about Huawei, which is doing a lot of business in Europe on handsets on the consumer side. And when you've got not just Italy, but also Spain and France starting to place all kinds of restrictions on what kinds of stores are open, how people can shop, I'm not sure there's enough delivery available for people to buy phones and equipment, even if they wanted to still buy them at a time like this when there are such concerns. So how much reduction in demand for electronics in general, maybe Apple specifically, are you modeling, and how long do you expect that demand to be suppressed?
Sure. So I think on Apple, I would say that overall right now, like I said, we had originally 202 million units for iPhone this year. They've gone all the way down to 185 million, give or take. So that's roughly a 10% cut. On Huawei, I think Huawei is slightly different because the reason is, John, you have a very valid point. They do have some share in Europe, but I would say that ever since the U.S.-China trade wars last summer or 2 years ago it started, and the ban on Huawei since last June, I think some of the demand in Europe has waned. Huawei largely is a China-only brand today, or I would say more than 70% of their units goes into the China market. So I think from that standpoint, they're probably slightly insulated. But I think to your point, I think it's more a question of Apple and the other brands, which might have an impact from Europe. But right now, we're assuming a 10% haircut to iPhone units. And also keep in mind, this assumes that demand does slowly start coming back in the second half. And calendar Q2 numbers are going to be really weak. And I think the stocks are already discounting that. We had to take it on a on a month-by-month basis to see if the demand collapses beyond Q3 or Q4.